Out of all the tools that a race director is going to need, this is probably the most important, essential, necessary, crucial. They get it. It is the timer. There are a bunch of different options. First, I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to show you what I use and some of the special features that I've hooked up to improve the spectator experience.
Stay tuned, video starts in less than 5.
Hello and welcome inside the Mind of Matt, and this is part 3 of my drone race director's tools, and this is a timer. What are the options? Well, there are a few different options. The first few are kind of unobtainable, or you might win the lottery to get one. The first one is going to be the Lap RF 8-way by Immersion RC. Looks like this. And this was made years ago, and pretty much anybody that owns one is not giving it up. Then the second option is going to be their smaller version. This is the Lap RF Puck by Immersion RC as well. These are also one of those items that to obtain one, you're pretty much going to have to win a lottery. Once in a while they go up on like a marketplace on Facebook or something, and they pretty much disappear instantly. So getting one of these is kind of like the 8-way. The chances are slim to none. So what does that leave us? Well, it leads us to open source projects, and probably the best one out there is my #1 choice, and it's the RotorHazard. What is a RotorHazard?
Time for a history lesson inside the Mind of Matt.
Well, there's an older version that was a Delta 5, what it was originally called, and it ran Delta 5 firmware, which is a Raspberry Pi based timer, and it also ran on Arduino Nanos, and you had to have one for each node and do a bunch of soldering. And there was an open source project, like I said, that you would have to flash an image, and then of course you would interface with it through a web interface. The development fell out, and it kind of got taken over by the RotorHazard development group, and they later on redeveloped the board into a newer version, a smaller, compact. You don't need the Arduinos. It runs off one of these. This is the S32B pill. I'm not an expert, I'm more of a builder, but the older version, like I said, uses individual nano Arduinos for each node. This one kind of combines them all into a tighter compact
unit.
So the open source is on GitHub, and it gives you all the resources where you have to order the boards through a board manufacturer. They provide the Gerber file, and then there's also individual nodes, and there's a lot of soldering, and it's quite the project to undertake. And then of course you need a Raspberry Pi, and you need to be able to program the Raspberry Pi. There's also the option to get one pre-made. There's a new version of the RotorHazard called the Nuclear Hazard, and there's a gentleman that builds them or sells you the kit, and you can get them off his Etsy store, which I'll leave a link in the description as to where you can get one of those if they're available, or also contact him and he will build you one to order, I believe. I have chosen the RotorHazard. Me and 2 of the other members of the club sat down together and we did the soldering all up and programmed them and everything. You do need a 3D printed case, which I just happen to have a 3D printer, and I've been working on, I have a new printer with color changing, so I've been doing a little customizing like that. But inside the RotorHazard, there is a feature where you can hook up more than one RotorHazard. They'll talk to each other, and you can make one like a mirror, and you can also set one up as a split timer that you can get like how fast you're going and stuff like that, which I have this one set up as a split timer, and my Launchpad is set up as a mirror. What I'm using these features for is for the LED features in both my start gate and my launch gate. By enabling these in your RotorHazard Raspberry Pi settings, it will allow you to program certain events throughout the race that will, once again, increase the visual experience. So that being said, I'm going to take you into the RotorHazard by puttying in and show you what settings you can change to enable LEDs, which if you don't do this part, you won't see the LED option in the RotorHazard interface by which I'll show you on the computer. Another thing, I'm going to show you the case that I have made and designed with the help of Mr. Rabble with some welding, and I'll show you my shielding, which helps with the actual signal that I'm receiving during a race and allowing me to narrow down my thresholds and marshal the round more effectively. So that being said, let's take a closer look at what's inside the box, and then we'll step over the computer and I'll show you how to program the LEDs and then either the split or the mirror or both. Once again, let's take a closer look. So this is my Launchpad, which I'm using an actual full operating older version of the RotorHazard. By the way, this was made by Bear Designs for me. He made it before I made the wood enclosure for it. But as you see, here is my custom tin case that I don't know where I got it from. Printed up a couple of frames to keep it insulated from the tin, Raspberry Pi. I got the LEDs hooked up through one of the 5-volt outputs on the, yeah, this actually is one of the Delta 5 timer boards before RotorHazard actually redesigned it and made it into this. There's a Raspberry Pi underneath. This is the B pill. That's what's inside my box that I'm going to show here in a minute. But you start out with just a ordinary circuit board. Buy all the individual components. You got to get these RX 5808s, which are kind of, you know, some of these things cost, these are like $7-8 a piece, depending on where you get it. Got to do some soldering to get it on the board. I ordered some in white. But this one runs off the old Nano, Arduino Nanos. You got to program each one, and a little different from the more easier to program this. So first I got to shut it down before I can unplug it.
Timing system disconnected.
All right, let's first take a look at my box. As you see, I've customized it. I have a LED input, or output, I should say, my power input, and my internet connection, which I always run a power source out to my timer as well as a cabled connection to the router back at the command center. So I have a custom 3D printed insert that adapts the box of the RotorHazard case that's printed. Oh, this one don't fit. This was designed for a short case. I forgot about that. So I will have to go back in and do a little redesigning in Fusion 360, but no big deal. Sidetrack, back on subject, inside the box. Let's get a closer look. All right, so what I basically just did was make short cables to connect my power source to the outside, as well as my short cable for my network, and a short cable coming out. You know, I can disconnect all of these. And then also there is a ground wire connected to that ground lug inside. You see it right here. And I'll show you on this open one that it connects to this negative terminal right there. Now that I have this open, I do have two modifications I'm going to make to it. One, I'm going to swap out this nice newly 3D printed cover, as well as I'm going to relocate this LED to the outside. Okay, without further ado, let's go over to the computer and show you a few things about some of these settings to change, and then how to actually make the LEDs do what you want at different events during the race. Let's go to the computer. All right, I do have to make a disclaimer at this point that if you're not familiar with the basic programming, logging into your Raspberry Pi remotely using PuTTY, or if you haven't actually set up a RotorHazard software, then this part might be a little confusing. You have to have a little bit of experience, but if you have a functioning timer and you follow along with this guide, you should be successful. So first, let's look at the LED setup. Now, in order to log into the Raspberry Pi, we're going to use a program called PuTTY, and we're going to use the IP address of the particular Pi that I'm trying to log into. The one I'm going to show first for just the LEDs is going to be the Launchpad. You'll need to know the login and password that you set up when you originally set up the Pi. Okay, from here you're going to want to get into the config.json file by typing in sudo nano RotorHazard, and it is case sensitive, just in case you didn't know, /src-server/ config.json, and sudo nano is going to come up. Now, I actually have to fix this to get the correct account. You will have to use your cursor arrow keys in order to navigate. You just can't click on the screen. I have 62. It also doesn't seem to like the number pad on my keyboard. Might be different for you. So that's all you have to do when you originally open up this file. It'll say 0. Then we're going to hit Control-O to overwrite, Enter, Control-X to exit. And then you should just be able to sudo reboot. All right, now that our Pi has been rebooted, you'll see here I've logged in, and we now have LED events and LED controls. And this is where you have all the different points in the race that some are useful, some aren't. And you can look through them. So race starts, you have all these different options. And they all do different things, and once you've got this up and going, you can play with them and see what works for you. Now when you buy the LEDs, they have this end, which I happen to buy a bunch of crimp-on style connectors that I could make a bunch, which I'll make a video about them as well. But when hooking them up, there's two connectors. Two of the wires go here. One of them is going to be the negative. The other one's going to be the signal wire. And then the positive is going over on this connection here. I'll show you on this board. And on one of the older boards, I'm getting my positive negative off of the timer board and the signal wire for the LEDs off of the GPIO pin on the Raspberry Pi right there. Okay, so now for setting up more than one RotorHazard together, and you can do either a mirror, which is going to do the exact same thing and work simultaneously with the main timer, or a split, which is theoretically supposed to tell you how fast you're going. We haven't experimented with this. I just recently set that timer up in that function, so there will be some testing and the results may get posted. As far as the mirror goes, I'm going to show you how to set that up in the same file actually that we edited for the LEDs. So we're going to log in to PuTTY to the main timer. Now another note about this is there's two timers. You're only going to make this modification in the config file of the main timer. So for me, I have my main timer underneath the start gate, and then I have my mirror set up underneath the Launchpad, and then in the future there'll be the split timer will be out somewhere on the track, or we're thinking about setting up just like a straightaway and just seeing how fast we could just fly down a hallway or something like that. Something cool. But anyways, as far as the mirror goes or the split time, the modification is only made in the main timer. Also, when you do set up a cluster, is what it's called in the RotorHazard documentation, when the cluster is powered up, the sequence is you want to do the mirror or the split, or if you have like 3 of them, you want to do those timers, you want to plug them in and get them connected to the system first, and then do the main timer after that. So that being said, let's log in to the main timer via PuTTY, and I'll show you. It's actually in the same exact file that we edited for the LEDs. Once again, you'll need to know your login and password for that particular timing system. And then we want to sudo nano RotorHazard /src/config.json. I will leave a link down in the description for all the text that you can just copy and paste. Okay, so as you see here, we've added. Now, actually, let's look at what it would look like as a default. So this is what it looks like under default. And right under here where it says Coral's allowed host, you're going to want to add this text. So you're going to want a comma, and you'll need to, like each one of the pies, when you actually set them up, you name them. So for differentiating the different timers that I have, my main timer is itmom RH. Then the secondary one on the Launchpad is actually RotorHazard 4-node. And then the split timer is Mr. Rabbles. So that pi name .local will automatically log into that. Now, if you do happen to know the IP and you have them reserved or dedicated in your settings of your router itself, then you could put those IPs in the address portion. But seeing how I know the names of the pies, this is what I do. So your names will be different than what I have here, and the mode and the mirror. Now the key is this is code, so there are some key things. So there's a comma here that needs to be added, and then there's this like a bracket here, and there's a bracket there. So these are important. Now if you look at the GitHub website about it, let's go into docs, cluster. The literature is kind of unsure. You kind of do see the bracket there. There's also some extra information that they provide that you can add. And I have not added any of the distance or the call out, just because I haven't experimented with them yet. So once again, I will leave the text down in the description for you just to be able to copy. And then, of course, you'll overwrite by Control-O, Enter, and then Control-X. And then you'll need to reboot. And once you reboot, you'll see in the, let me get to the right board, we'll log into the admin, and if you go under status, you'll actually see that the split timer is there. It says that it's not found because it's not connected, and the for node is there as a mirror, and it did lose its connection, but you'll see that there'll be like a timer counting down when it's actually connected. So I hope that you found this useful, and maybe you'll set up some LED gates or a split timer for yourself. Now, the gates and stuff that you saw are more of a TinyWhoop related gates, but this could be translated to larger gates or UWL gates or something to that effect, where you want a LED effect. So there's also the capability of doing panels. I did mess around with them in a earlier version of RotorHazard with no success in getting the actual effects that I wanted. But that being said, if you find this useful, please don't forget to hit that like button. Leave comments if you would like me to do a full install version of RotorHazard. I did see on their website something about let me find it real quick. The RotorHazard install manager. I've never used that. I've done it the old-fashioned way through all the different commands that you have to use in the software setup, which is, if you can copy and paste and not get lost where you've left off, then it's not really that hard of a process. It's just time consuming. So one other thing that I'd like to say about RotorHazard is that they have functions built into it where you can manage a race right inside RotorHazard. I normally only use this screen here for tuning the nodes, because I use a different race management system, which I will be covering in a future video. So make sure you're subscribed, hit your notifications so that you know when my next video is coming out, and keep on coming back, because there will be more inside the Mind of Matt. Peace out.